Well-made furniture often includes decorative elements that have been turned. On this piece right here, they've just turned some spindles and attached them to the face of the piece. But on other pieces of furniture like this, you can see that there's only half of the turned element. So I'm going to show you today how that's done. So when you look close at this part of the furniture, what you're going to find is something that looks like this. You have a square part, and then you have a round part that's looks like it's been carved into the square part. And in some cases it has been carved, but there's a much easier way to do this. What they would do is they would turn a spindle, much like this one right here, and then they would split it apart and just glue that half onto the front. So now you have a square part that you can actually use to create mortises and tenons that has a decorative turned adorning on the front of it. So how do you do this? You're going to need 5 things: some newspaper, the blank for your spindle, some salt, some clamps, and also the glue that you want to use. Normally when you turn a spindle, you want the blank to be perfectly square, but in this case you want one side to be about 1 millimeter longer than the other. And this is because we're going to be cutting this blank down the middle, and we want to leave room for the saw blade so that when we glue the two halves together, you do get a perfectly square blank. After you cut it right down the middle, because you have left 1 millimeter for the thickness of the blade of the saw that you used, you will end up with two halves that when put together will be perfectly square. The next step is to glue the two halves together, but you don't want to glue wood to wood because then you just get one solid piece again and you wouldn't be able to get it apart. You want to have a piece of newspaper in between so that you can split it apart without damaging each half. So make sure that you get the glue on every single part of that one face and then glue the strip of newspaper to it. After you've done this, you want to take the other half and spread glue all over it. Again, just like the other half, you want to have glue on every single part of this piece of wood. And then you want to take some salt and put the salt at a few places on the length of the wood. The salt is water-based and it's going to dissolve as the glue cures, but it's going to provide some grit so that you can actually line up each half and it doesn't slip as you clamp it. Put a bunch of clamps on and make sure that they're nice and tight. Then leave it for at least 24 hours because you want the glue to be nice and cured and this thing to be solid so that it doesn't come apart on the lathe when you're turning it. You'll notice that I have torn off the excess pieces of newspaper that were sticking out from the sides. This isn't really necessary. It'll come off as you turn the spindle anyway, but personally I don't like the sound of the newspaper hitting against the tool rest and flapping as the piece is turning around. So it's my recommendation to try and tear off that excess newspaper as best you can before you start turning. Now you may have noticed that I did not turn the ends of this spindle, and that's on purpose. The part of the spindle that I actually intend to use is from here to here, but in this next step we're going to split this apart. So I wanted to have extra wood on the top to be able to fit in my chisel so that even if I mar it, since I'm going to cut it off anyway, it's not going to make any difference. So now let's split this apart. You want to put the spindle in your vise, but when you do this, you want to make sure that the line of separation is going perpendicular to the vise, because you're going to be splitting it this way, so the pieces are going to want to separate this way. If you turn it around so that that line of separation is parallel with the vise, then when you try and split it, the vise is going to hold the piece together and you're going to wind up splitting the wood. So get yourself some sort of tool like this, which is kind of like a paint scraper or something like that. A dull chisel will work. You don't want to have it too sharp because you want to have the chisel be able to get inside the split line and not necessarily start cutting away wood. So once you do half of it, flip it around and split it from the other side. And there you go. Next, take a block plane or just some sandpaper and try and clean off the excess newspaper that remains on the inside. You'll notice that some of the ink has transferred to the wood and you can't get it off, but that's not going to affect anything, so don't worry about it. Clamp the two pieces together in a vise and then cut off that excess part that is not part of the turning. The last step is to glue this onto the square part. Now I recommend using hide glue because when you put this together you're going to have glue that spurts out the side, and sometimes it's kind of hard to clean up because of the different curves in the turned spindle. The hide glue will allow any finish to come through and you're not going to get any blotches or spots or anything like that. When you glue the two pieces together for the blank, you can use any type of glue you want, just as long as it's strong. Here's the finished product. Now obviously you want to cut your mortises before you glue on this turned element to it, but this is what you end up with. I'm building a bookcase where I'm going to have spindles supporting one side and drawers on the other, so having half spindles on the drawer side will just bring the whole piece together and will keep the design consistent throughout. Thanks for watching. I hope that helps somebody.